She lost everything in one summer, a heartbreaking story from 1950s. Some secrets don't stay buried forever. They simmer beneath the surface of small-town life, hiding behind white picket fences and Sunday church smiles. This is a story about Rosewood, population 3,847, where everyone knew everyone's name but nobody knew the truth. It's summer, and what happened that August would change everything. But first, you need to understand something about small towns in the 50s. Reputation was currency, and once you spent it, you could never earn it back. Her name was Eleanor Hayes, and this is the story of how she lost everything she thought she loved, only to discover what love actually means. Picture this: checkered kitchen floors, the smell of fresh apple pie cooling on windowsills, the hum of Buddy Holly on every radio. Rosewood looked like it had been torn from a postcard. Main Street had Miller's Diner, where the coffee was always hot and the gossip even hotter. There was Henderson's Five and Dime, the bijou theater that showed only the finest pictures, and St. Mary's Church, where Reverend Thompson preached about moral living every single Sunday without fail. Eleanor Hayes was 22 years old, wearing her best Sunday dress, walking arm in arm with Thomas Sullivan, the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties. His father owned the largest farm supply business in the region. Thomas had just returned from 2 years in the service, and he'd chosen her. Plain Eleanor Hayes, daughter of the town librarian, and a father who died in the war before she could remember his face. Everyone said she was lucky. Thomas was handsome, polite, a perfect gentleman who opened doors and remembered to ask about her mother's health. They'd been courting for 6 months, and everyone in Rosewood was already planning their wedding. But here's what they didn't know. Thomas had never once looked Eleanor in the eyes when he said he loved her. It started small, the way heartbreak always does. Little moments that didn't quite add up. The way Thomas would check his watch during their dates at Miller's Diner, his eyes constantly drifting toward the door like he was expecting someone else. The way he'd cancel their Saturday night plans at the last minute, always with a reasonable excuse. Farm business, he'd say. You understand, don't you, Eleanor? And she did understand. Or she told herself she did, because questioning it would mean questioning everything. Eleanor's best friend Margaret worked at Miller's Diner, slinging coffee and collecting secrets the way other girls collected recipes. One sweltering afternoon in July, she pulled Eleanor aside between the counter and the jukebox, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. Eleanor, honey, there's something you should know about Thomas. Eleanor remembered the way her stomach dropped, the way the world suddenly felt too small and too large all at once. The chrome on the counter gleamed too bright. The smell of hamburger grease turned her stomach. Whatever it is, I don't want to hear it, Eleanor said, already pulling away. But Margaret grabbed her wrist, her fingers cold despite the summer heat. He's been seeing someone else, every Thursday evening when he tells you he's got business in the next county. Eleanor, I've seen them together. Her name is... Eleanor yanked her hand free and walked out before Margaret could finish that sentence. Because if she didn't hear the name, maybe it wasn't real. Maybe she could keep pretending just a little longer. That night, Eleanor lay awake wondering, how long do you hold on to a dream before it becomes a nightmare? Thursday came, and Eleanor did something she'd never done before. She followed him. She borrowed her mother's Plymouth and drove 3 miles behind Thomas's red pickup truck, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. He drove past the county line, past the turnoff to the business district, and pulled up to a white farmhouse she'd never seen before. Modest, isolated, surrounded by cornfields that whispered secrets to the wind. Eleanor parked behind a cluster of oak trees and waited. 20 minutes. 30. Then the door opened, and Thomas emerged with a woman she recognized immediately. Catherine Morrison. She'd moved to Rosewood 2 years ago, a widow with a young son, barely scraping by working at the textile mill. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional way. Her hands were rough, her dresses worn thin. But when Thomas looked at her, really looked at her, Eleanor saw something she'd never seen directed at herself. He looked at Catherine like she was the only person in the world. They stood on that porch, and he held her face in his hands with a tenderness that shattered Eleanor. Then he kissed her forehead, and Catherine laughed. Not the polite laughter they used in parlors, but something real and raw and completely unguarded. Her little boy came running out and Thomas scooped him up, spinning him around while the child shrieked with joy. Eleanor watched the life she thought she wanted playing out with someone else's face. The drive home was still a blur in her memory. She remembered gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles went white. She remembered pulling over twice because she couldn't see through the tears. And she remembered the moment the grief turned into something else. Not anger exactly, but clarity. Crystal clear, painful clarity. Thomas didn't love her. He never had. And she'd known it all along. Eleanor confronted him the next day at Miller's diner, in front of half of Rosewood. Not her finest moment, but pain doesn't always come with dignity. "Catherine Morrison," she said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "Thursday evenings, a white farmhouse past the county line." The color drained from Thomas's face. Around them, the diner went silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that checkered floor. Margaret stood behind the counter, her hand covering her mouth. Old Mr. Peterson froze mid-bite of his slice of cherry pie. "Eleanor, let me explain." "Don't." She held up her hand. "Don't you dare insult me with explanations now. Just tell me one thing, Thomas Sullivan. Did you ever love me? Even once? Or was I just convenient? The acceptable choice? The girl your parents approved of?" He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. And in that silence, Eleanor had her answer. "You could have been honest," she whispered. "That's all I ever wanted, the truth." She took off the promise ring he'd given her 3 weeks earlier, a modest thing, but she'd worn it like it was made of stardust, and placed it on the counter between them. Then she walked out of Miller's diner with her head held high, even though inside she was crumbling. The whole town watched her go. And by sundown, everyone in Rosewood knew that Eleanor Hayes had been jilted, abandoned, made a fool of. In 1956, that was a mark that didn't wash off. They say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But in that moment, Eleanor felt like she was dying from the inside out. The next 3 months were the loneliest of Eleanor's life. Small-town gossip is its own particular form of torture. People who'd smiled at her the week before suddenly found reasons to cross the street. Church ladies whispered behind their programs during Sunday service. Even her own mother, God bless her, looked at Eleanor with a mixture of pity and disappointment that cut deeper than any words. "You should have been more attentive," her mother said one evening while they washed dishes. "A man needs to feel appreciated, Eleanor. Maybe if you'd tried harder." Eleanor dropped the plate she was holding. It shattered on the kitchen floor, pieces scattering like her shattered illusions. "What should I have done differently, Mama? Should I have loved him more? Laughed at his jokes harder? Pretended better?" Her voice cracked. "He was in love with someone else. That's not something I could have fixed by being more attentive." But her mother just shook her head, already bending to pick up the pieces. In her world, in Rosewood's world, a woman's worth was measured by the man beside her. Without Thomas, Eleanor was incomplete. Broken. Less than. Eleanor stopped going to church. Stopped attending the town socials. She'd arrive at the library before dawn and leave after dark, surrounding herself with stories of people whose lives were far more complicated than hers. And somehow, that helped. Jane Austen understood heartbreak. So did the Bronte sisters. They'd survived without the approval of small-minded people. Maybe she could too. Then, on a gray October morning when the leaves were falling and everything smelled like endings, a stranger walked into the library. His name was James Porter, and he was unlike anyone Eleanor had ever met in Rosewood. He wore paint-stained clothes and carried himself with the kind of ease that came from not caring what anyone thought. He was an artist, passing through on his way to Chicago, but his car had broken down and he'd be stuck in Rosewood for at least a week, while Henderson's ordered the necessary parts. "I need books," he announced, dropping a canvas bag on Eleanor's desk. "Lots of them. Poetry, philosophy, anything that makes you think. What do you recommend?" Eleanor stared at him. In Rosewood, men didn't ask librarians for book recommendations. They asked about farming almanacs and technical manuals, if they read at all. "You want poetry?" she repeated. "Sure. Whitman? Dickinson? I'm not picky, as long as it's good." She showed him, and somehow, in showing him her favorite books, Eleanor started remembering who she was before Thomas, before the shame, before she'd let other people's opinions define her worth. James came back every single day that week. They'd talk for hours between the stacks about Hemingway's sparse prose and Fitzgerald's tragic romanticism. He told her about his art, about wanting to capture the human condition in color and form. And one afternoon, he said something that changed everything. "You know what I love about you, Eleanor? You're real. No pretense, no performance, just honestly yourself. That's rare." No one had ever called Eleanor rare before. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. James asked Eleanor to leave with him, to come to Chicago, start over, live a life not defined by Rosewood's narrow expectations. "I can't promise it'll be easy," he said, standing in the golden afternoon light filtering through the library windows. "I'm broke most of the time and my apartment is barely bigger than a closet. But Eleanor out there, you could be anyone. You could study, write, work, whatever you want. You wouldn't have to spend your whole life in this town that treats you like you're broken." It was everything she'd secretly dreamed of. Escape. Freedom. The chance to become someone new. But here's what James didn't know. Catherine Morrison had come to see Eleanor the week before. She'd appeared at the library after closing, her thin coat pulled tight against the autumn wind, her eyes red from crying. At first, Eleanor wanted to slam the door in her face. This was the woman who'd stolen the life she thought she wanted. But something in Catherine's expression stopped her. "I'm not here to apologize," Catherine said quietly. "What Thomas and I did, the lying, the sneaking around, it was wrong. But I need you to understand something, Eleanor. I never wanted to fall in love with him. I tried so hard not to. But after my husband died, I was drowning. Thomas was kind when nobody else was. He helped me fix my roof, brought groceries when I couldn't afford them, played with my son when he needed a father figure. I didn't steal him from you, Eleanor. He was never really yours." Those words should have hurt, but instead, they freed Eleanor. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because Thomas broke off our relationship," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "After what happened at the diner, he said he couldn't bear the shame he'd brought on his family. On you. He joined his cousin's business in California last week. He's gone, Eleanor. And I'm here to tell you that you deserve better than a man who was too cowardly to choose love over reputation." She turned to leave, then paused. "I hope someday you find someone brave enough to choose you, not because you're acceptable or convenient, but because you're you." Standing there in the library with James waiting for her answer, Eleanor realized something profound. She'd been asking the wrong question all along. It wasn't whether Thomas had loved her. It wasn't whether James could save her. It wasn't even whether Rosewood would ever accept her again. The real question was, did she have the courage to choose herself? She thought about her father, who died fighting for freedom before she was old enough to remember his face. She thought about all the books she'd read, stories of women who'd defied expectations, who'd walked away from security to chase something real. She thought about Catherine Morrison, struggling alone because she dared to love the wrong man. She thought about her mother, still living by rules written by people who'd never questioned whether those rules made sense. And she realized, this was her one chance, her one shot at a different kind of life. "James," she said slowly, "I appreciate everything you're offering. I really do, but I need to tell you something." His face fell slightly, already reading her answer in her expression. "I can't go with you," she continued, "but not because I'm afraid, not because I'm letting Rosewood win." "Then why?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "Because if I leave now, I'm still running from Thomas, from the gossip, from all of it. I'd just be trading one person's definition of my life for another's. Even if you're kinder and more accepting than Thomas ever was, I'd still be defining myself through someone else's vision." "So what are you going to do?" James asked quietly. "I'm staying," Eleanor said. But not the old Eleanor who let Thomas string her along, not the Eleanor who shrank herself down to fit into other people's expectations. "I'm staying as myself, completely, unapologetically myself." James smiled then, a bittersweet expression that told her he understood. "You're braver than I am," he said. "No," she replied. "I'm just tired of being afraid." He left for Chicago the next morning. But before he left, he painted something for Eleanor, a portrait of a woman standing alone on an empty road. But instead of looking lost, she looked powerful, free. "For the bravest person I've ever met," he wrote on the back. Eleanor hung it in the library where everyone could see it. And then she did something revolutionary for Rosewood, Illinois in 1956. She started living for herself. She enrolled in correspondence courses to finish her degree. She started a book club at the library, and when the church ladies complained it was inappropriate for an unmarried woman to run public gatherings, she invited them anyway and made them discuss Virginia Woolf. She wore trousers on Saturdays, which scandalized half the town. She ate lunch alone at Miller's Diner every Sunday, taking up space, refusing to disappear. Some people never forgave her. Her mother struggled to understand. But slowly, painfully slowly, something shifted. 6 months later, on a warm spring morning, Catherine Morrison walked into the library with her son. She'd heard about the book club and wanted to join. They looked at each other across that scarred wooden desk. Two women who'd both been burned by the same man, both learning to rebuild from the ashes. "I'd like that," Eleanor said. And Catherine smiled, not with pity or smugness, but with understanding. But here's the twist you didn't see coming. The person Eleanor had been so angry at, so devastated by losing, Thomas Sullivan, she ran into him exactly 1 year after that confrontation at Miller's Diner. He was back in Rosewood, visiting family. Older, harder somehow, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He approached her on Main Street, hat literally in hand, and said, "Eleanor, I owe you an apology. I was a coward. I hurt you because I was too weak to be honest. I heard you're doing well now. I'm glad." And do you know what Eleanor felt? Nothing. Not anger, not vindication, not even satisfaction. Just nothing. He was a stranger to her. That girl who'd loved him, who'd thought his approval defined her worth. She was gone. In her place was someone Eleanor liked much better. But the real twist, the one that still makes you shake your head in wonder? 2 years after that, Eleanor married someone. Not James, though they still wrote occasionally. Not some new stranger who swept through town. She married David Chen, who'd been working at Henderson's Five and Dime the entire time. Who'd been invisible to her because she'd been too busy chasing what she thought she was supposed to want. David was Chinese American, which meant marrying him required even more courage than staying in Rosewood alone. It meant facing prejudice not just about her scandalous past, but about their future. It meant her mother didn't speak to her for 6 months. It meant people crossed the street, not just to avoid her, but to avoid them. But David loved Eleanor for exactly who she was, sharp-tongued, stubborn, unconventional, and she loved him for seeing her when she'd been invisible for so long. They built a life that wasn't acceptable or convenient. They built a life that was theirs. That's what Eleanor learned in the summer of 1956 in Rosewood, Illinois. Love isn't about being chosen. It's about choosing yourself first, so that when someone else chooses you, you're whole enough to know if their love is real. Thomas didn't break Eleanor. He freed her. Catherine didn't steal her future. She revealed Eleanor never had one with him to begin with. And James didn't save her. Eleanor saved herself. Some people will never forgive you for refusing to be small. Some towns will never celebrate you for being different. Some hearts will never clap for you when you walk alone. But here's what Eleanor knew. The applause of people who don't respect your truth isn't worth having. And the courage it takes to walk alone, to really truly walk alone, is the only courage that matters. Because once you find it, you're never really alone again. Conclusion. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose yourself over everyone else's expectations? And if you want more tales of courage, heartbreak, and the messy, beautiful truth of being human, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Because there are more stories to tell. Stories of ordinary people finding extraordinary courage. Thanks for watching, and until next time.